This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
Hello and welcome to News Extra here on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. Today, our conversation focuses on artificial intelligence and the growing conversation around it in Europe and the rest of the world. The European Union, the EU, has changed its position on regulating the AI space, explaining that the decision to change the tech regulations is to spur investments in artificial intelligence. Now, the position of the EU on AI regulation, this position to ease the regulations was announced just after the February 11th AI Summit in Paris, France. On the other side of the conversation is a criticism from the United States, with US President Donald Trump threatening to retaliate against the EU for the fines that it slapped on US tech companies. Now, there's a bit more of a background story here, but we are going to be speaking with techpreneur Ade Atobatele to get a sense of the arguments as far as the tech space is concerned and to unravel what position it is the global north is taking on perhaps the new frontier when it comes to science and technology. Mr. Atobatele, thank you for joining us on News Extra.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. To start with, we have seen essentially the US, if you want to call it that, take on the rest of Europe when it comes to the tech space, as more specifically AI in recent times. And I'm curious as to, what your thoughts are on the EU's position when it comes to tech regulation.
The EU is always overcautious. They are a citizens' rights charter type organization. The citizen leads first and everything else comes afterwards. On the other hand, the US is always a investment-led or body, and we'll fix it once we start making some sort of money. That's between them. I don't really think, to be totally honest, that it should bother us either way. We should be worried about our own data sovereignty and our own data, owning our own stack. Yes, we may not be creating the models, but a couple of weeks ago, DeepSeek gave its own model out as open source. And more and more people are doing that. We have an opportunity to build on the open source part of this and to be able to culturalize it, for lack of a better word, towards our own needs. Prior to Microsoft and fighting with Google, open source was the major way that tech did things, that they got standards. I mean, if people remember Linux and Unix, well, especially Linux, they were open source software. I think Africa has a unique opportunity right now to leave the fighting about ethics and whatever technical regulations are going to be done to those people who want to fight about that, and take the fact that the competition is creating open source software, and take that software which is free and build upon it to create our own stack.
So, Mr. Atobatele, we'll come back to what we should be doing and how we react in a moment. But, I want us to step back and still look at the global conversation. So, first off, if you've got the EU, which has been traditionally big on regulations, you've got them easing regulations. At this summit in France, we also saw what was the US and the UK deciding that they were not going to sign the international agreement on artificial intelligence. And mind you, this is an agreement that pledges open, inclusive, and an ethical approach towards the development of this tech. In the US itself, we also saw big tech companies silently remove certain if you like, words and statements that pledge towards being ethical and being responsible. It does raise the question of what the AI race, what that development will look like over the next year, 5 years, 10 years. What are your expectations of how this, I don't know whether I would say it would derail or push advancements within the space?
The funny thing about AI is that the people on the outside assume that the people on the inside are actually in control. They're not. That's a surprising thing. The AI is getting more and more capable. Let me not use the word intelligent and offend certain people, but if you ask Sam Altman or anybody that says they're in charge of an AI company, how exactly its AI got to learn Spanish when it wasn't fed any Spanish things, it won't be able to tell you, because they don't actually know the inner workings of these AI that they're creating. They just know that if they provide more compute power to it, it gets more intelligent. So when you say that you're going to regulate something, you tend to be able to regulate what you know. So I think the US has taken that approach that, look, we're not quite sure what is there, but we think that if we don't move forward, somebody else will. And that's the approach that they're really taking. It's going to take a disaster or some sort of catastrophe before everybody suddenly says, oh, wait a minute, let's figure out how to put a wall around this thing. I mean, you wouldn't get on a plane that had a 99% failure rate. That means that 1 in every 100 would fail. Planes reliability is a lot better than that. But it's only because the plane fell out of the sky or something like that people got to that stage. Same with cars.
Right.
Same with our electrical appliances. So until something happens, people are just going to move forward with innovation. And that's what the EU has suddenly realized, that they're not going to be able to stop anybody until something really happens. So unless they want to neuter themselves and be definitely second in the race, they better allow their own citizens not to be falling foul of their own laws in moving forward.
It's interesting that you talk about the UK and being, or rather Europe and being second. A few things to consider. One, I'm looking at the geopolitical tensions now within the tech space. First off, you've got the US having led this advancement in generative AI. But then with the launch of DeepSeek, the rest of the world suddenly realized that China's actually been in the race. It's just that they've been largely quiet. And in China's case, we're not even certain the extent to which the government is fully involved in how these companies are redefining that space. Then you come to the EU, or just Europe altogether, because I think it was last year, was it, that former UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak put together the AI Summit on safety. Then you now have France putting together this global summit as well. So there's big questions on which of these. Oh, by the way, just very quickly, if I can add that the recent visit we saw between the Indian Prime Minister and the UK President, they also talked about partnerships in AI. So you've got these geopolitical tensions that are trying to dominate the space, redefine what AI looks like. And I'm curious as to how you see the outcomes playing out. Now we can start to think about what it means for Africa and for countries such as Nigeria.
I think it was George Bush or one of those presidents around that time that stopped STEM exploration, the stem cells in America. We didn't stop it anywhere else, and so that technology got better outside America. So the best STEM places to go these days tend not to be America. In other words, you once the genie's out of the bottle, it's rather difficult to put it back, and that's where you realize that in a geopolitical situation, your borders are really what you have to control. And the Americans have seen this now because DeepSeek actually came out, despite the fact of the sanctions. And what I'm really trying to say here is that this is smoke. You cannot put it back in the bottle. It will happen because somebody somewhere will believe that they can get an advantage. So if you corral your people, it's not going to be to your advantage in the long term. You're just going to give somebody else, whether it's your ally or your enemy, an advantage. And that's to the Chinese. We have to remember that they have a built-in advantage. They don't speak English. So we don't pick up their newspapers or their journals or whatever and read what's going on. When DeepSeek came out, what we didn't realize is that DeepSeek had already created a very big furore inside China by actually lowering the cost of AI compute to the extent where both Alibaba and everybody else had to start lowering their own prices to compete with them. It's only when it started to become available in the English language that everybody took cognizance of it. But it had been there back in summer. It had created a big problem in China itself. So that's why I keep on saying that individual countries need to ask themselves, how do we benefit from the information that is readily available out there? And how do we create our own stack so that it's not somebody else's cultural bias that our children are going to be having access to? Geopolitical tensions will always happen, but it's like being a bird. Innovation doesn't see that. It's way above the geopolitical tensions that man creates. It's just everywhere. It's, as I said, it's like smoke. Once you let it out the bottle, it goes everywhere.
Right. Speaking of going everywhere, Mr. Atobatele, we've typically seen that when there are tensions in Europe of any sort, there's usually an effect on Africa. And I know that you've talked about us taking advantage of such open source, platforms like DeepSeek to essentially get into this conversation. But I wonder where you see the arguments going for Africa, with Europe on the one side talking about protecting people and the US focusing on capitalism. How does this play out for Africa, really?
Well, you see, the beauty of open source is that it doesn't matter. We don't need to worry what they're doing. We only need to worry what we want to do. You get the source code to open source, and if you have enough people that understand it, you can take it in whatever way you want. If America paints its own blue and Europe paints its own red, we can paint our own brown, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And that's why I say it's a unique opportunity, because it's like being given cement and sand and land free. All you have to do is get the laborers, and a house will appear.
Well, Mr. Atobatele, thank you very much for your time and expertise on this conversation. Ade Atobatele is the CEO of Remarkable Ideas Limited and a tech expert who joined us to speak on the changes in regulations when it comes to artificial intelligence from the recently ended the February 11th summit in Paris, France, where the EU has essentially changed their position on regulations guarding the AI space. You're still on to Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. We urge you to stay tuned to your Beyond the News station. In a few short moments, we'll be opening up the front pages of our dailies on the News Review.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.